What's up, Elevation Nation? We are back. Sam, myself, and we have a very special guest, Justin Weidenfeld, joining us. We're back from experience camps. Sam and I spent a week in Michigan, and we're excited to debrief what that week in Michigan was all about. And we have Justin, who is the boys side director for the Georgia experience camps. And we're going to actually flip the table here to Justin. Justin's going to be interviewing us on Elevation Nation today. So, Justin, before we hand it to you, what's going on, brother? Welcome back to Elevation Nation.
Happy to be back. Happy to flip the script and ask you two a couple questions. Excited for it. And I'm on the edge of my seat just wanting to know how camp is. So glad you pressed record and we can get after it.
Justin, I can't thank you enough for this idea. To recap this week is perfect. To have you facilitate the conversation, I think, is even more meaningful as one of the people who influenced us. And I'm just so excited to get into it. As you can imagine, it's been an emotional week and a strange return to reality, so to speak. And nothing makes me happier than really spending some time to get deep, vulnerable, and reflect on quite possibly the most impactful week of my life. So thank you for facilitating this conversation with us, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And Parker, you asked what's going on. For me, it's getting back to reality as well. I had my very special week down in Georgia. Had like an amazing program with some amazing volunteers and equally, if not even more, amazing kids. And I'm excited to hear about Michigan, or as they call it up there, Midwest.
Well, before we get into it, Justin, just so our audience knows, could you give us a little bit more of an explanation of what Experience Camps is, how it began, and where it is now?
Yeah, well, yes. In 2009, Experience Camp started as an offshoot of a sleepaway camp called Manitou, which is the one that I went to. And the owner of Experience Camps and his wife, Sarah, or the owner of Manitou and his wife, Sarah, started Experience Camps with 27 boys at the main location. Today, and this year in 2024, we're going to have 1,300 kids across 6 different locations, both boys and girls programs across the nation. It's incredible how far we've come. And it's incredible all the amazing people that we've brought into the organization, including the two of you.
It's, was something that you mentioned on our first podcast that, to be perfectly honest, I kind of brushed off just because I didn't know much about it, had no idea really what it was. And as someone who hadn't, experienced direct grief, at least at the level that many of the folks at experience camps have, I kind of just said, oh, that's a cool thing. And as we learned more about it from you, we learned more about it from another elevator, Samantha Soloway, and Parker and Miles experienced tremendous loss this year. And as being a close friend of both of them, and me losing my grandmother this year, it was kind of grief hit us all in the face, I think, quicker than we ever anticipated. And when the opportunity arose for us to not only go to experience camps, I know you were pushing for us to come join you, Justin, but the fact that we got to go to Michigan, where we had so many roots in the Chicagoland and Detroit area, and going to the actual camp that Miles' sister Hallie attended, where she has her bench dedicated to her, to be able to have the Grossmans come and spend time with us, was truly remarkable. And I can't wait to get into more details about this week, but just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart of being one of the first people to expose us to such an incredible organization that I know Parker and I are just getting started in.
Yeah, I'm super happy to. And my favorite thing is to expose people to the organization, the magic of camp, which you've now experienced, and to hear about it. So I'm excited for this conversation. Circling back to the original question, so like, what is experience camps? It's a 1-week free overnight camp for kids aged 8 to 18 who experienced a loss of a parent, sibling, or primary caregiver. We have activities that are both clinically driven by licensed grief specialists, as well as fun activities at camp like making s'mores, horseback riding, potentially some milkshakes, playing sports, jumping in lakes, pools, all of that. And then through play, through camp, through these programs, we give grieving kids the possibility and the hope to flourish in their lives after experiencing such a loss. So in my eyes, that's what experience camps is. But now that the two of you have actually been to camp, and Parker, I'll start with you, how would you describe experience camps to the audience?
A beautiful, powerful community of people who are putting one step forward each day. It was such an incredible group of people, especially in Michigan. And for me personally, I went to experience camps a day after we had my stepfather's unveiling and the day of his 1-year death anniversary. So my sister and I, literally on the first day of camp, we were dealing with already a more emotional day, right? And by the end of it, as I was walking out of camp while Colby and I were driving away and going to the airport, I look back and I'm realizing how special of a place experience camps is, and how special of a community, especially Midwex, is. And I feel like I've lifted a lot of weight off my shoulders, and I feel so fulfilled in the impact that, or even the little impact that I was able to make on a community of not only adults, but more importantly, young people who have experienced that tremendous deaths or loss in their life. So, man, I'm pumped to get into this conversation. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah, I think you put it beautifully. It's when you lose someone so close to you, you have a couple different, really two different ways you can go. You can go left and you can go right. And you being a marathon runner and putting one step in front of the other, like, that's incredible that you're able to build that analogy into the grieving process, and putting one step in front of the other,
Well,
one
what's
step
crazy
forward.
about what's crazy about it too is when we initially welcomed you to the nation, Justin, is we interviewed you on a Wednesday night. And Sam and I had no idea really what experience camps was. You told us about your experience at experience camps. And as crazy as it sounds, and this is reality, Philip, my stepdad, died 3 days later. And so it's really crazy, and thinking about this whole year, like how all those things just kind of lined up in a weird way. And I walked out on whatever day, it was Sunday, and I'm like, now is time to turn the page for me personally. But man, the impact that camp has on these kids is so profound and elevated, and this is something that is so powerful.
Yeah, it really is. And thank you for sharing it. It's crazy what happens in this world and how it kind of has a path for you. I want to hear about, like, your stepdad and experiencing it with Colby, your sister. Like, that's amazing. But I want to pass it over to Sam here. How would you describe experience camps to the audience now that you lived it and breathed it and felt it?
It's so funny you ask, how would I describe it? Because on our last day, Parker, Jake's daughter, Miles, and myself sat looking out at the stars, and I said, I don't know how I am going to bring to life what I felt this past week. I have no idea how to put this into words, which is like such a cliche people say about things that I think you can describe. So I'll do my best, but there's just magic at camp, specifically at experience camps with the children that we help and the counselors that are there. So to give people perspective, it's a fully free camp. No one pays to go, nonprofit. many of these children come from inner city areas where they don't have a lot of resources. They've never really been in nature. They haven't had those opportunities to learn to swim, to go in a lake, to go tubing, to try archery. So it's a deep mix of young people. More importantly, for me, yeah, we had a great impact on the students and young people there, and that was incredible. I think the people that are counselors and clinicians there are also such a key part of the magic at camp. As someone who works from home now and lives in a city and doesn't get to meet a lot of new people, I feel like I found the type of people that I want to surround myself with. Folks that said, yeah, I'm going to take 5 to 6 days of vacation, not get paid, sleep in a twin bed in a bunk with a bunch of other kids, live a little bit rough and not eat the best food, but do this to find fulfillment. And that to me was really beautiful. Not only did I feel such an immense impact from the young people that I got to mentor and share their stories and tears and hugs and laughs, but also the adults that I met are some of the most selfless, incredible human beings that I'm so grateful to call friends now. And that mix created an environment that is truly hard to describe, but the only thing I can say is it's just magical, and I encourage everyone to try to experience something like that.
Wow. You said a few things. The first one, though, is like, if you don't like chicken tenders, mac and cheese, and Uncrustables for every meal, like, I probably don't care for you as a person. No, I'm just kidding.
I wish we got Uncrustables. By the way, I'm putting that out there. If there were Uncrustables, that would be my choice every single second.
I mean,
so
I told you to come to Georgia.
All right, well, I'm putting a proposal in for Midwex to get Uncrustables for sure for next year. I know peanut butter, can't,
Sun
peanut
butter.
free. We can go like sunflower butter Uncrustables.
Yeah, I think they make them. If not, we got time to figure it out. We'll call up Tiny Twist. But Sam, like, you're 100% right. Like, the people who volunteer with this organization and the kids who take a leap of faith and hop on that bus, whether they're like, some kids are forced to by their parents or their surviving caregiver, and some kids willingly hop on the bus to leave their lives and spend a week in the woods, sleeping on twin beds, eating chicken tenders, mac and cheese, and not Uncrustables. And because they care about the person sitting next to them, and they want to come back and be a kid again, just like us.
It's a beautiful thing. I think not only do they want to be a kid again, but they want to be around people who understand them. And that was one of the greatest things that I saw and got to experience was, for many young people, they feel like an outlier in their schools or the communities. Grief to them is something that they have to hide and they can't truly process. Not only do they have, gobs of hormones and emotions that they're still uncovering, as my kids were 10 years old, 10-year-old boys, shout out Bunk One, all the way up to, 17-year-olds, right? We're all still processing our emotions. And I think one of the greatest things that Experience Camps does is it gives you an opportunity to be with people who understand your grief and don't shy away from it. And not only is there magic in the wilderness and going to camp in the woods, trying new things, absolutely, but the true magic, I think, came at our clinical sessions where kids got to express their grief in different ways, whether it was through art, verbal communication and storytelling, physical activity. They were able to process their grief in a way that felt comfortable to them, with people that made them feel comfortable. And to me, that is the greatest gift that we have to give young people who have experienced death. Many of them, not just death, but traumatic death. That was something that shocked me, Justin. And I think I naively thought, I'm going to a camp a couple hours outside of Chicago. I imagine there being a lot of North Shore, well-off Chicago kids who experienced loss, coming very similar to Parker, Miles, and myself. And while we certainly had that, it was eye-opening for me when most of the kids in my bunk didn't know how to swim, had never gone in a lake before, came from rough inner-city areas where they were experiencing food poverty and some issues in that regard. that was truly eye-opening for me. And one moment stood out for me on our last day. I had all our kids, clean up, pack their bags, bittersweet. The bunk was clean, and I remember being in the cabin by myself and the heart-wrenching reality of thinking, within these four walls, I know all my kids are safe and will have food and have someone that cares about them. And having to stomach the fact that I was about to send them back home to, some loving, of course, caregivers, but some folks that maybe weren't giving the love emotionally and physically and financially to the kids that they wanted to. And that, I think, was one of the hardest things that I don't know if I've still truly processed the emotions yet of not knowing how my kids are going to do for the next year.
Yeah. That's typically one of the hardest things that our counselors face every year. It doesn't necessarily get easier because you really don't know what the kids' lives are at home, and they do get deep and vulnerable with you, and share some details. But you said it really well. Part of the magic of camp is like you take kids from all socioeconomic backgrounds and bring them together into this bubble. And it doesn't matter if you're in this class, or you have this amount of money, or you have these resources, or you have a dad or a mom, or both or neither. It's you're there because of that loss, and the kids are there because they experience that death, and they're there because in some way or another they get it, and you're around people who get it. So I want to dive into the stories, but Sam, to your point, like it's not easy to come to camp and hear these stories, and you don't know what you're getting yourself into, really. As much as I can explain it and talk through it with the both of you, you really don't know what you're getting into until you get there. So Parker, you told us that it was your stepdad's unveiling the day before. Like, what was your frame of mind like going into camp? What headspace were you going in with?
I mean, Sam, we signed up how long ago? Like 6 months ago, 8 months ago. We interviewed, we got, accepted. And I'm a big camp guy. I love camp, right? I went to summer camp for 8 summers as a camper, 4 summers as a counselor at a 7-week traditional sleepaway camp, right? Where you don't go home. You're there all summer. And I'll do anything to get back to camp. But I'll be completely honest, the day before Colby and I left, I didn't want to go. I was like, screw this. I don't want to go, because I was handling my own grief in a way that was very challenging and difficult, being it 1 year since I experienced one of the worst day of my life, and losing my mentor, obviously my stepdad, my business coach, my everything. And I looked at Colby, I was like, I don't think we should go. Maybe we make him an excuse and not go. And we pushed ourselves to get on that plane. We pushed ourselves to get in that car and take that step forward to get through that day and be there for the kids. And so I'll be completely honest, while everyone was so excited that they were back at camp at orientation, everyone's jumping around, really excited. I remember we were standing around in a massive circle. There's 120 of us, Sam, or something like that, and everyone had to just introduce themselves, say their name, where they're from, what bunk they're going to be in, and that was it. And I can tell you that was one of the most nerve-wracking moments that I felt in a long time. Not because I'm scared of public speaking. No, Sam and I public speak all the time. It was because I was dealing with emotions that were the complete opposite of the energy that everyone was bringing that moment. Everyone was bringing that positive, wow, we're back at camp, this is so exciting. But yet no one knew what Colby and I, besides Sam, Jake, and some of our close friends who were there too, no one knew what we were going through in that time. And I think once we, got through that first sharing circle and that first day, the weight was just absolutely lifted. And I'm so grateful we made that trip, because it was an incredible week.
So why? What is the sharing circle? Why was the weight lifted? Who lifted it? How was it lifted? Because you're not.
I also wanted to, and Justin, I agree with that. I wanted to also ask Parker, Now looking back on it, Parker, is there anywhere else you would have rather been to process the grief a year later? Can you think of a better place that would have, right? Like,
I mean,
now that you've done it.
Any other place, I would have loved to be with my mom, right?
Sure.
And that was the hardest part, not being with my mom on the day that she lost her husband and best friend and everything. That was so challenging. Next to that, yes, being at grief camp with all these clinical specialists and other people who you don't know what someone else feels, who have been through a similar experience. Yes, it was a great freaking place to be. And that first sharing circle, for those of you who don't know, sharing circle is we gather together, and basically it's a very intimate time where people can just share what they feel and say whatever's on their mind. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about death. It could be literally just sharing how you feel. Granted, most people share about how they feel about their grief. And that first sharing circle, for me, this was without the kids. It was just the counselors at the time. I just poured it out, everything. And it felt like I had bottled up a lot because I'll be completely honest, there aren't many people who I'm friends with and associate with who've experienced what I have. And at experience camps as a 28-year-old male, I was surrounded by other people who understood how I felt. And that felt really effing good. And that released so much tension in me. And I didn't even think I had a lot to release until I got there and then let that happen around people I've never met before in my entire life.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So when my first camp, like the first camp I went to was in Pennsylvania, and then when I moved out to Georgia, Georgia's schedule is the first week of really August, and my dad's death is August 4th, or the date of his death. And so like every year leading up to this one, because this year we started a little bit earlier, and I was actually able to spend it with my mom and my stepmom. Every year I've been at camp, and yeah, it sucks not being with your family in that moment, but also there's no place I'd rather be honoring my dad, Don, or Philip's legacy than giving back to this community.
That's such a good point, because Philip was a man of service, and I know he was looking down on us that last week, so proud. And I felt that all week. And that's why I said when I walked out of there, I felt so whole, because I knew I had just experienced something that would make him very proud. And that's a way I want to live my life, because Philip was such a virtuous human. He had a great instinct of what was good and what was not. And that is one of the many things, but more importantly, I know for certain he'd be proud of that. And that feels really good.
Hell yeah. And I'm proud of you for doing it. So we have volunteers who come grieving a loss of a parent and a sibling, and we have volunteers who have experienced grief in other ways, whether it's other losses like a grandparent or just different types of losses. And so, Sam, I know you lost your grandma, and but tell us about your personal frame of mind and headspace going into camp, and what was it like for you? And I heard through the grapevine you did really well in bunk one. You had big camp energy. So tell us more what where you were mentally going into camp.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, we had our first kind of staff sharing circle before the kids came. And I was just completely honest with my clinician and my bunk mates. And I said, I feel a lot of imposter syndrome being here now, having met many of you. And it was hard for me because, yes, I lost my grandma. And that was, a big loss for me. But she had lived a long and fulfilled life. And to then hear some of these stories of how many people were taken early, whether it was a parent, sibling, caregiver. I felt like a little bit like an imposter to try to relate mine. And really what it boiled down to as I started to dive in and tell my story and talk through it was I was there for Parker and Miles. And having been, best friends with both of them through this past year and having to support them in their grieving in two totally different ways and two totally different approaches, that's why I was there, to be there for my brothers and learn how to support them even more than I have this past year as we continue our friendship and continue the grieving process together. So, once I said that and a little bit of my hesitation and my imposter syndrome, I was met with such love and support from all the other counselors and clinicians there, that my grief of, I had a relationship with Philip and I had a relationship with Hallie. And just because it was not, direct family doesn't mean I wasn't handling grief. And I'm also grieving my past friendships with Parker and the Yablans and Miles and the Grossmans and how they've evolved as people and how I've changed as a person. And so that really gave me the confidence that I needed to go in and say, you know what, maybe I can't fully relate to these kids in that way, but I think I can in other ways. And not only did I have that experience with the counselors and clinicians, so full adults, when my campers, again, 10-year-olds, came up to me and said, hey, Sam, what loss are you here for? Or who died in your family? I was able to open up and tell them a little bit about the imposter syndrome I was feeling. And I'll say a quote that one of my kids said. He looked at me, gave me a hug and said, you can still be here, man. We still love you. You still experience grief. And at that moment, I realized I'm just with some of the best humans on planet Earth. And it just felt like home.
I have chills. I love that story. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I said this at orientation last year and again this year. It's when you're around someone who's grieving or in this community, like what a grieving person wants is just someone who's going to show up for you because they just lost someone who has inevitably shown up for them in their lives. And Sam, the fact that you just showed up to camp, went through the application process and all of the trainings and just showed up to camp and was truly vulnerably yourself, that's all these kids want. It's not about you, it's about them and what you can give and provide to them. And you're a person who brings big camp energy, but also like people who have not experienced the loss of a parent can show up for someone who does.
Well, I appreciate that. It certainly was, such an honor to be there and be included and now to be a part of this Experience Camps family. Something I'm infinitely proud of. And I know Parker and I can't wait to continue not only on the individual levels of being counselors every year. I know we both certainly plan on going back year after year. It's the most fulfilled I've felt in a long time, but also how we can support Experience Camps to grow in regard to Elevation Nation and some of our networking connections. And so I know this is just the beginning of us being really involved in such an amazing organization.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see that come to fruition. Parker, tell us, let's transition to a high note here. Tell us about some of your favorite activities at camp.
Oh, man, where to start? There's so many activities. I think the best ones were the ones where you could see the kids fully embracing camp, where they're smiling and laughing and getting competitive in some way. And it's just so inspiring because it's the nature of a child. But I learned so much about the human spirit, that although these kids are going through some of the worst pain that they will ever feel, certainly pain as a child too, having someone die and who you're very close with, to also smile and have fun is so inspiring. It was fun getting back on the basketball court, playing around the world, playing soccer and World Cup and going in the lake and, doing all those things. But I was asked to do the smoothie making, milkshake making, whatever we want to call it, activity. And that was the most bizarre but yet I can't even put words in it. It was so awesome. And I felt like I was literally a child doing that. What's the way to like even describe this? Basically, I was part of an activity that's kind of like a transition activity. They bring all the kids to this, like to the lake. This year it was both the girls' side and the boys' side. They brought them together, and they asked 5 counselors to basically tell a story about some people who created this milkshake to help them get big or strong, or I don't even remember. And we made up this stupid story, and at the end of the day, it just ends up creating this milkshake with this massive milkshake with ice cream and sprinkles and chocolate syrup, and there was no whipped cream, but there was a lot of milk. And yeah, you create this milkshake in front of everyone, and it just gets reckless. You're spraying the kids with chocolate. You're dumping milk all over yourself. Sam got into it. Miles got into it. We literally were like kids. Felt like I was a six-year-old again. Just not giving an F about anything and just leaning in. And after that activity, the adrenaline rush I had and the feeling of just joy was so special. The kids absolutely loved it, but I can't imagine, Sam, from your viewpoint, what that was like to watch, because it was so ridiculous.
Dude, it was so fun. Parker rocked it. He ripped his shirt open and poured a gallon of milk down his head, and then started spraying all the kids. I think like just hearing their joy and laughter was so beautiful. And yeah, I felt like all of us were little kids. I put an ice cream crate on my head as a helmet, and I just started getting in a food fight with everybody. Like, what an amazing memory. It was so special.
There's nothing like getting like kids playing dodgeball with frozen ice cream at your back while you're like not even like looking. Kids are literally like they're literally dipping their hands in this massive thing of ice cream, coming up behind me, just chucking it at you, and I'm like, oh my God, like what is happening right now? There's a video of me taking the chocolate syrup and just like literally just dousing my whole entire face, my mouth. It was so great. And even better is that beforehand, Jake Stoddard also participated in this, and they had to make an announcement that Jake was allergic to chocolate. Jake doesn't like chocolate. He's not allergic, but they had to tell the kids, hey kids, keep the chocolate away from Jake. And by the end, Jake had so much chocolate on him, but I'm very proud of him for sticking through and not throwing up everywhere. But it was just, I can't explain it. Like, it was incredible. I hope, Justin, that, down in Georgia, it lived up to what we did in Michigan. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. Well, me and Jake have it in common because I also don't like chocolate or allergic. Except that message doesn't get passed to the kids down in Georgia, and so I end up with a chocolate syrup on my head, which that's just part of camp, is like getting comfortable with being comfortable and doing it for the kids. So I saw some pictures that it sounded and looked incredible. So Sam, besides this kind of play into messy food fight that Parker led and experienced, what was your favorite activity?
Man, there were so many, but I think one stood out for me in particular. I had a 10-year-old in my bunk who didn't know how to swim, and just huge look of fear on this boy's face when he got into the water, near the water, just petrified. And we worked with him throughout the week. And by the end, there's a beautiful picture of me, and I'll call him R, in the lake, life jacket on. I'm holding his belly while he's learning to kick and swim, and the biggest smile on his face. And not only that, other of the kids in my bunk, 10-year-olds, were coming over and teaching him and showing him techniques. And everyone rallied around teaching this kid how to swim. And I don't know, like, I just felt like in Inside Out, they have these core memories. I was like, how cool is it that I get to be part of this kid's core memory of, hey, this is the first time I jumped in a lake and learned how to swim. That was, I think, my favorite activity in memory.
That's beautiful. And I love the part that all the other kids came around and supported him in trying to swim. Like, if mental fortitude has taught me anything, it's that you need a support system around you. And the fact that you were able to provide it, and the fact that you also role modeled and encouraged the kids in your bunk to, I'm just imagining them like swimming around and be like move your arm like this and like kick like this, wow, that's an amazing story. Sam, were there...
Justin, I want to share another quick story. So this wasn't my favorite activity, but this was one of my favorite memories that I'd love to share. We have these things called sharing circles throughout the whole week. And some of them are just, in the day with a clinician, and you do an activity that talks through grief. And some of them are in front of the whole campfire, end of the day, where people share stories. And this was our second out of 3 campfires with all the boys' side of the camp. I'm sitting next to one of my campers, and someone goes up and shares their story of, the person that died in their life and the trauma that they went through, how it impacted them, and is getting very emotional in front of the entire camp. And I start, crying a little bit. And my camper next to me, who I absolutely adore, was crying too. And he puts his arm around me, gives me a hug, and says, while fighting back tears, he says, "I want you to know, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here for you." This 10-year-old boy said that to me. And it was one of the most impactful moments that I had throughout camp. On the final campfire, that same boy and I were bawling our eyes off, looking for what we call is I think it was called like their paper lantern kind of thing. Everyone, as part of an art activity, makes a paper bag that is dedicated to the person that they had die. And we put a little candle in it, and it lines the road leading up to campfire. It's a stunning visual. And we're walking to try to find his bag. And he says to me while crying, "Since my dad died, you, Sam, are the only father figure that I've had, and I don't want to lose you." And that was on the last night of camp. And these are the realities that we faced. You develop such strong bonds with these kids. It's just the most beautiful experience, and then it all goes away. And I think, Justin, we did this at the perfect time, but also at a horrible time, this podcast, because I just got back. Yesterday was a recovery day, and I honestly haven't processed my emotions yet. They haven't fully hit me. I'm still running on the fact that like these kids are part of my life and part of my mind. And I'm struggling for the fact that, and I'm going to call you, when it hits me is like, now I have to wait a full year to see these kids, and it just sucks.
Yeah. For the record, I did text you yesterday, and you both yesterday, and I was like, have you processed, like, are we still on for tomorrow? But it does. It sucks. And I think, that being said, one of your initial comments was, I want to bring camp to life. And you're having these vulnerable conversations on Elevation Nation. And like, it may not be exactly like camp, and it may not be a 10-year-old looking up to you, but you really are like, you're doing your best, and I think you're going to continue to bring camp to life. And for me, one of my biggest takeaways this year is, how do I bring camp into my business, into my personal life? How do I make every day feel like camp? So I appreciate you saying that. And I mean, the kids, you can tell, like, you have bunk one, which is the youngest kids, the 10-year-olds, which is difficult at times, but also the most rewarding, because they're not afraid to speak their feelings and tell you exactly how they feel. And that was beautiful. We call those, down in Georgia, we call them magical moments. And I think they're called that throughout camp. So you go from exciting activities like milkshake making and s'mores and rock climbing and horseback riding and basketball and all these different things, to more emotional moments like campfires and grief sharing circles, and then back. And so, Parker, do you have any magical moments and magical moments and memories that you want to share?
Might have lost you, Justin, just for a tad there. Anything?
Yeah, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I didn't hear it.
It looked like Justin got muted before he was done, but maybe not.
Got it. Okay, I think you just put something in the chat. What magical moments do you want to share? Oh, man. Magical moments. All right. I was waiting to bring this out. This is something I wrote today because I wanted to write something up. Sam knows I'm trying to get my writing habit going, which I'm not very good at, keep myself accountable. So I wrote this little story that I'm going to also post on Thursday when this episode comes out, but I want to read it because I think it's a magical story. So here it is. I spent the last week volunteering at a grief camp run by Experience Camps, and I wanted to share a story that deeply moved me. A boy stepped off the coach bus, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings of the Michigan camp with a mix of fear and uncertainty. His person had died recently, and coming to camp was a big step for him. Most people would expect grief camp to be all about sadness, tears, and talking about pain. On the first day, he was silent, keeping to himself and avoiding eye contact. Even the counselors couldn't get more than a nod out of him. It was as if he had built an invisible wall around himself, a barrier to protect him from this new world. By the second day, he managed to say a single sentence about his mother to his bunkmates. But after that, he ran off to the soccer field where he kicked balls with an intensity that spoke louder than words about his anger and sadness. On the third day, he watched from the beach as his bunkmates played on the water trampoline, claiming the water was too cold. But with just a few minutes left in the activity, he jumped in, still wearing that serious expression, trying to keep his emotions inside. By the fourth day, he was starting to open up. At lunch, he complained to his bunkmates about not being woken up for the morning polar plunge. It was a small sign, but it showed he was beginning to feel more comfortable in this new environment. Then came the fifth day, the campfire night. As his bunkmates shared their stories of loss and pain, he listened quietly. Finally, he found the courage to speak about his mother, and as he did, tears streamed down his face. He cried, not just for his own loss, but for his friends, feeling their shared pain. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing all those emotions he had been holding back. On the sixth day, while packing his bags to go home, I asked him, "So what did you think of your week?" He looked up, his face still showing traces of last night's tears, but he smiled and said, "It was the best week of my life. I'll be back next year." He zipped up his bag and ran off to join another camper in a game of catch. I don't know if you caught any of that, Justin, but man, I spent all day writing that because I needed to put into words the power of this place and the resilience that these kids show through just a week.
Can you hear me? It's beautiful. That's the transformation that happens at camp. It's literally 5 days. It's only 5 days in a long life, in a long year. But these kids really do transform. I don't think in my 6 years of going to experience camps, I've written something like that as highlighting the transformation as beautiful as that. So thank you, Parker. It sounded magical to see it.
It was incredible. I mean, that is that was one camper, and you feel that with so many others. I mean, Sam, I'm sure you resonate too. Just you see these kids over just such a short period of time be able to exert that mental fortitude to just release.
I want to highlight, because mental fortitude is the theme of the podcast, and is something that you can take back to the podcast and back to your life from your experience in camp. So, Sam, were there any, besides your 10-year-old friend R swimming in the lake, were there any examples of mental fortitude, both for you, mental and difficult and emotional situations that you had to come to grips with at camp, and then also mental fortitude that you saw campers experience or exude throughout the week, or anybody else?
100%. Oh my gosh, yeah. So much mental fortitude this week, both from counselors and campers alike. I think for myself, I learned so many new skills on people and stress and managing humans. 10-year-olds don't listen to logic. They don't understand that concept. And so to learn how to lead 10-year-olds to do what you want and need to do, from activities, from going to bed, from cleaning up, from whatever, I can handle any client you throw at me now. I was able to get 10-year-olds to listen to me. So I think I learned a lot of valuable skills and exuded some mental fortitude to get through the week. In terms of emotionally for myself, a ton of mental fortitude was used. You know, you don't want to show necessarily, I thought I didn't want to show weakness in front of my campers and cry because I didn't want to make them cry more. And 90% of camp is smiles and laughing. It's just during some of the introspective clinical moments do we get emotional. And seeing my campers open up when I started to open up my emotions helped me realize that I can be a role model for them to get deep and introspective. And so I saw that. I'll call him D for the sake of the story. But throughout all of our clinical activities, D never shared his story. He never opened up. He kept really closed off. He kind of was the big baby of the bunk, whining and crying and not getting his way. And on our final campfire, D got up in front of the entire boys' side of the camp and shared the traumatic experience that he had of watching his person get murdered in front of him. And the fact that he had the mental fortitude to push through his uncomfortableness, to push through his fear of sharing, to push through his tears, and to share that with our entire boys' side camp was so impactful for so many of us. And I know he exuded a ton of mental fortitude. And I'm literally counting down the days, 357 days until I get back to camp, and I can see how much he's grown in a year.
And they do. They grow in that year. I would say these kids, whether they're 10 years old or 18 years old, like, they're some of the most mature people I have ever met in this world because of what they've gone through. And I say, at sleepaway camp growing up, we had this saying 10 for 2. You live 10 weeks to come back to camp or 10 months out of the year to come back for 2. You live 51 weeks out of the year to come back for this 1 week where you can see these kids transform and grow up.
I'm also ready for these kids to grow physically as well. I'm expecting I had 8th graders. Some of these kids are about to go through a massive growth spurt at any point. So we get back next year, some of these kids might be towering over me. It's kind of funny, but what were you saying, Sam?
I was curious, Parker, are you going to try to follow your campers and get the next bunk next year, or are you going to stay with 8th graders?
I have not reflected enough to be able to make that decision. That's really difficult.
48 hours later.
I will leave that to Parker way down the road when we're gearing up for next summer, May or June. But it's a good question because I really enjoyed my time with my co-counselors and my campers. They were awesome. They were great, and
yeah,
some were new, some had been there for a long time, and man, I hope they have an incredible year and a year fulfilled with their dreams and their desires, and hopefully not too much sorrow. All right, man.
Well, their year's definitely their year's better because of your experience with them.
Exactly.
Was there? We can wrap up in a sec, but was there any additional moments of mental fortitude that you'd want to highlight?
I had a moment where I was sitting, and Sam and I have been through. This was another unique experience, as Sam and I think like to call it, an elevated experience. You know, Sam, when we were in college, we spent a night in prison. Literally, we spent a night with people who were judged, about something that they had done, and we spent Yom Kippur with about 20 Jewish inmates in a prison. Most of these people have been in prison for more than 10, 15 years. That was a transformational life experience that we always lean on, that inspired, I think, mental fortitude before we even knew what Elevation Nation was. And then this is another experience I think of where I look at it and I'm like, well, what's crazy about this? Like, all these children and even counselors and people who are volunteers have all experienced tremendous loss. And it reminded me, as humans, if we are alive, we're going to experience tremendous loss at some point. And all humans are going to go through that pain. And it's places like experience camps that allows those to truly live their mental fortitude and bring that to life so that they can walk a step forward and out of that camp and back into their community and live with mental fortitude to elevate their life and put one step forward to go where they want to go. Every single human will go through. That is inevitable. And that is why, back to my moment where I said, Sam, this inspired me on a new level, because every single person, it's the missing piece. We all have it, but we don't know how to elevate it. I'm talking about mental fortitude. And so it's places like experience camps that elevates people's mental fortitude. And that is what Sam and I are on a mission the last 4.5 years, sharing and inspiring. And we're just getting started, because there is so much more mental fortitude to elevate now.
Experience camps is literally a community of elevators. It's people who are giving up a week of their lives to come to a camp for a cause that's impactful. Come to a camp to be a kid again. Come to a camp to climb the ropes and face fears and eat chocolate even though they don't like chocolate, or go swimming in a lake that might be in too cold. I don't know what's in the lake in Midwest, but it's got to be something good, because you guys have a lot of energy right now. But it's a community of elevators, and so after our last podcast, I knew that you guys would love it there. So coming back to the real world, and I know reflection has been minimal and sleep has been minimal. Sam, what was your biggest camp takeaway, or what would you say mental motto is now that you've returned from camp that you want to incorporate or others should incorporate into their lives?
Man, it's such a good question. There's so many different ways I could take that response of like, what is the motto coming out of camp? I think for me, selfishly, one of the things that I learned was perspective is everything, and my mindset controls my perspective. It was really hard to come back and pretend and try to care about our jobs, I'll be honest. And I'm sure some of my colleagues are listening, wanting to know how camp was, and I love you all, but the juxtaposition of hearing the traumatic events that happened to, and getting vulnerable with me about what they're dealing with, to then come back and look at an Excel spreadsheet, I was like, bro, I could make so much more of an impact. And that's hard. And I think finding that balance is going to be a struggle for me as I continue to process post-camp blues of how do I get as much fulfillment as I can by giving. And so that's something I want to do more of, these just big, impactful, emotional roller coaster experiences is something I want to have more every single year. So I learned a lot about perspective from these kids and what they went through. That to me was the biggest motto of camp, and the takeaway that I'm going to carry with me for as long as I certainly can. I'm just grateful. I'm so grateful for this experience. Like, I don't know. It's going to be really tough to beat the week that I just had. It's with some of my best friends in a stunning, beautiful place, making an impact on incredible human beings while meeting and being challenged by even better human beings. You know, Jimmy V says, like a day worth living is a day where you like laugh, cry, smile, everything in between. Like every single day was the highest highs and the lowest lows. And I just want to live more days like that. What a beautiful way to experience all that life has to offer.
Well said, Sam.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, one of my takeaways is always like you never know what someone's going through, and so that person who's on honking at you, sitting in traffic, or emailing you back, like I hear you and I feel you. Like the work, like we have important work. Don't get me wrong. Like our jobs are important, but some of the minute details, like your return on your investment account over the past month, is so minimal compared to coming up a loss. And so I love mindset controls perspective, and yeah, your mindset will lead you places and control your destiny. And yeah, I'm grateful that you had those realizations.
Boys,
Parker, go for it.
With my mental motto now, or I don't think my mental.
I'll prompt you with
Okay,
the
let's hear
question,
it.
but you went to camp to honor Philip's legacy and to be there with your sister and your family and your best friends. So what was your biggest camp takeaway, and what's a mental motto that you want to incorporate in your everyday life now?
My biggest camp takeaway, among all the other things that I've shared on this episode, was I've never felt more heartbroken and heartwarmed at the same time during camp. More heartbroken and heartwarmed than ever. And I feel, like I mentioned earlier in this episode, in this conversation, I walked out of there knowing that one step was put forward for me. I know Colby was able to put one step forward. I'm not sure if all the kids were able to put one step forward, but I hope that they had a week where they were able to explore who they are at their core, dive headfirst into their grief, and put one step forward. Because that's what grief is all about, I think, is just trying to put one step forward. And so my takeaway is one step forward. That's not my mental motto. My mental motto is still proud to be, and I'm never changing it. Sam, we're going to have to figure out a way that we have to write this in, because we got shirts and everything now, but proud to be. I'm proud to be who I am. I'm proud to be on the journey that I am. I'm proud to have the experiences that I've had. I'm proud to have shared the experience that I've had with people, and I'm proud of where I'm going, and I continue to remind myself that. That's my mental fortitude. That's my mental motto. And as I said, Justin, we're so excited to be part of this community. We're so excited to continue to return to camp, and we're so excited to find ways to elevate experience camps alongside with Elevation Nation. So we're just putting one step forward. We're getting
Before
ready.
we wrap, Parker, I want to give special shout outs. Justin, thank you for helping facilitate this conversation beautifully. We truly appreciate you so much and how much you care about us and experience camps and Elevation Nation. I want to give a shout out to all of our camp directors at all experience camps, but for us at Midwest, and our camp directors, our clinical directors and clinicians, and all of the fellow counselors and campers. I know you guys are listening and told me that you wanted a shout out. So all the campers on the bus that were listening to Elevation Nation, thank you for your support. I know you girls and guys are listening now, and I love all of you, and I can't wait to see you next year.
And I was proud to be on this podcast with the two of you. Thank you for having me back.
All right, Elevation Nation. Until next week. Peace.